Hello and welcome to Fast Course Macroeconomics. I am your host, Caden Kemmer, and this is the first edition and the only edition of this series, and that's because this was made for the sole purpose of getting the grade, getting a project grade. Aside from that though, this episode is about supply and demand, but before that, you need to know that to think like an economist, you have to think like both a economic philosopher and a scientist. Scientifically, economists take complex situations in the world and simplify them, and plot and analyze them. They become economic advisors when applying that information to the real world and making philosophies about them, and making conclusions about them. For example, if you take a world with a market with many goods and then you simplify to a market with just one good, ta-da, you have supply and demand. Now to measure this, you also have to take out other variables such as seasonal goods, and you'd have to take out the variable of time, or brands and the people who choose to buy those exclusively. It is also assumed and simplified that 100% of these goods will have the exact same quality. Now the first aspect of this is supply, in which my wonderful intern Craig has given me papers and visuals to show you supply. Supply, who, what, when, where, why. Who? Well, the producers, the companies, people who produce and sell goods. What? It's the amount of an available good at a given price. When? All the time. Where? Everywhere. And why? Because we like selling things. So, here's the graph of supply. The law of supply, which is that as the price of a good increases, the quantity supplied of the good increases. This is like a company is more willing to sell more of a product if they're going to get more profit for selling that product. Similar to supply, we have demand. This time, who, what, when, where, why, who? We are the consumers. Everywhere we shop, that's what the demand is. When? All the time when we're shopping. And why? Because we can't make them better. I cannot make shoes, but I can buy a wonderful pair of shoes for money. With money. We have demand. It is showing, unlike the supply graph that goes the opposite way, this displays the law of demand, which is that as price of a good increases, demand of the good decreases. It's because as the price of a good goes up, people are less willing to buy it. Thank you for my arrowless graph that doesn't have any arrows on it because I didn't add those. Those were thanks to my intern Craig. That's the only thing he did except for hand me the papers. So, you know, they better be good arrows, really. They really better be good arrows. Okay. So the graphical representation of supply and demand is going to be measured by price versus quantity, price being on the y-axis and quantity of the supply and demand being on the x-axis. The relationship of these are opposite as shown before, or as discussed before, so you can see that they have a point where they cross. This is called the equilibrium point, as labeled right here with the EQ. This creates a equilibrium quantity of supply and demand and price. Next is shifts. Shifts in graphs. We're going to begin with the supply shifts graph. What? Craig, I told you to put 3 arrows. There's 3. You only need 3. You don't need 4. You're just wasting time drawing these arrows. They don't need to. Still looks nice. I'll let them pass on this. If you want to increase supply, you would shift it to the right, and if you want to decrease it, you would shift it to the left. If supply shifts to the right or increases, the price decreases and quantity increases. On the contrast, if it shifts to the left or decreases, price increases and the quantity supplied and demanded decreases. Next to the other half, we have demand shifts. I really hope there are 3 arrows. Oh, dang. Demand works the same way. A shift to the right is an increase in demand, and a shift to the left is a decrease in demand. However, a shift in demand to the right increases both the equilibrium price and quantity. while a shift to the left decreases both the price and quantity. You know, Craig, you really messed up my stuff here, man. All you had to do was draw arrows. And these arrows they're not even the same size. Last but not least, but kind of, we have double shifts, which are pretty much two shifts happening at the same time. Now, before we get into this, I'd like to describe the difference between a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. A change in demand could happen because people's desire changes because of something in the world that isn't price. Quantity demanded, on the other hand, is due to price. Because of price, it is the only reason. However, for our example here, you can see that supply shifts to the left and demand shifts to the right. Now, these are happening at, for the most part, the same time. As you can see, the equilibrium price does go up because, as we discussed earlier, an increase in demand and a decrease in supply both raise the price, yet have opposing effects on the equilibrium quantity. Whether it's greater or less than the equilibrium to begin with is dependent on the magnitude of each of the shifts. You know, Craig, these arrows are they're so awful. Especially on the unknown. I don't even think they, let alone the text I made. But I do like that bar. It adds something of interest. You don't know quite what it is. You don't know. Alright, we're done here.